Okay, I now have 7 p.m. and that is the stated hearing time. So uh, the date is Thursday, September 5th. The time is 7 p.m. and this is the continued hearing on the application of Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital by their attorney, Mary McEtrick, for the property located at 199 Reedsdale Road, uh, under an application dated May 8th, 2024, seeking a special permit to build a one-story, 8,119 square foot, more or less, addition to the existing emergency room structure facing Highland Street, replacing an existing parking area. Additionally, plan proposes adding a ground level parking area to the next to the existing two-story parking structure and relocating the ambulance loading and unloading zone for a net increase of 80 parking spaces. This requires a special permit per the Milton zoning bylaw, Article 3, Sections 275-3.1, Article 5, Section 275, 5.3, and Article 275, Section 11.2. The property is located in a Residence B zoning district. All this herein set forth in said application and plans on file with the board and open to public inspection. My name is Frank O'Brien, and I will be acting once again as chair for this hearing. Joining me are my fellow board members, Kathleen O'Donnell and Michael Brown. This is I would say, the third meeting of the board on this particular application. We've already had two public hearings and we had a site visit as well. The board has benefited greatly from public participation as well as by the extensive materials provided by the applicant in this case. I would note that there were a number of recent filings in that regard, traffic studies, stormwater studies, lots and lots of technical information, as well as several communications in the peer review realm regarding some of the work that's already been done. Attorney McEtrick was also kind enough to provide an additional memo concerning the application as well. Before I turn it over to Attorney McEtrick to bring the board up to speed and to provide some additional information for the board, I would note that it is well known in the community that a local hospital, Kearney Hospital, located in Dorchester, has closed. And as a result, Milton Hospital, being the nearest hospital to the now closed Kearney facility, is expected to see an increase in patient volume as a result of the closure of the Kearney. I'm sure that Attorney McEtrick will address that as well. I would note, however, that the closure of the Kearney and the potential impact on Milton Hospital has been noted in a number of media articles, including an article today in the local Milton paper. So just want to put that on record that the board is well aware of the potential impact on Milton Hospital. I'm sure Attorney McEtrick will address that as well. So with that, and before I turn it over to Attorney McEtrick, do any members of the board have any questions or comments that they'd like to make at this time? All right.
No, Mr. Chair.
Seeing none.
No, thank you.
Attorney McEtrick, the floor is yours. Good evening and welcome once again to the Board of Appeals.
Good evening. I'm Mary McEtrick and I represent the applicant for this application. And you've summarized how many meetings we've had to date and the fact that we had a site walk in early August. It was open to neighbors and some neighbors also attended that site walk. And there was some pretty good discussion and explanation of parking and also stormwater structures on that walk. So this meeting was continued from July to this date to try to provide enough time to have our peer review consultants or the town's peer review consultants complete their reports, which are reviews of the stormwater and engineering for this project. That's one report from a peer reviewer, Horsley Witten. And then the second report is a peer review of the traffic and parking study that the hospital has produced. And this was actually, it was right down to the last minute getting these reports completed. But both peer reviewers came through. We did get so the process is the peer review report goes to the town of Milton, and it has to be reviewed by the DPW, Department of Public Works. It also has to be reviewed by the town engineer, and there may be other people in the town also, fire department and other departments who need to review it. So when we get the peer review report, it actually doesn't come to the applicant, it comes to the town. What's happened is it has gone to the town and it has been then sent to the applicant, and the applicant has provided responses to each comment in each peer review. As of earlier this week, that's where we were. Today, we had meetings with the hospital's consultants with each of the two peer reviewers, for one for traffic and the other for engineering and stormwater, and went through all the peer review responses, and then spent most of the time in each of those meetings talking about any response where the peer reviewer felt there needed to be more information or more elaboration or further explanation. So at this point, the hospital has a fairly clear idea of what more information will be requested in the second response from each peer review consultant. But still, that second response will go back to the town engineer, Marina Fernandez. She will decide whether it's responsive and adequate. See, and in addition to those two peer reviews, the town does its own review, particularly the town engineer does, but the DPW does as well, of the site plan. And the town engineer writes her own comment letter, which is sent to the applicant. The applicant provides responses to that letter, and that goes back to the town engineer. So that's already taken place. And at the meeting today, there was some discussion about the applicant's responses as well. What I can tell you is that overall, the responses look as though they were responsive. In other words, the questions that are raised, some of them are just clarification of where data came from or provision of additional information. Those appear to all have been answered. There were some questions that needed further discussion, or there were requests that perhaps it would be a good idea for the hospital to conduct studies after completion of construction, maybe a year later. Some of those related to traffic primarily. So what I would like to do tonight, if the board is willing, is I'd like to have each consultant, the traffic consultant and the stormwater and engineering consultant, present their, report really on this peer review process. I know the traffic consultant has prepared, that's Sean Manning, has prepared a slideshow for you. It's not too long, but it will review the entire traffic and parking report. And the slideshow incorporates changes that have been requested and have been agreed to by the hospital. So I don't see Maria. Is Marina Fernandez here?
So there's, if I can jump in,
Yes.
there's a few people that are in the attendee list, but not panelists, that we probably want to promote.
Okay.
Marina's on, Steve Stanish is on,
Right.
Sean Green is on, which is listed as NEMD Architects.
Right. So they
And
should all be promoted if that's possible so that they can
yeah,
participate.
that's probably
Okay,
the
I am doing so.
I know Marina had something else that she needed to go to tonight. So what we talked about this afternoon was having the presentation or the discussion of the stormwater and engineering report and peer review and responses, to do that first, because that's where Marina well, she could make any of her comments towards the beginning of the meeting, so that if she needs to leave, she can. So I'd like
That's
to know
fine.
if the board
That's
would be agreeable with that order.
Yeah, that's fine. So why don't you tee it up?
Okay, so this is going to be Justin Mosca from VHPB, Steve Stanish from Horsley Witten. They did the peer review, and then Marina Fernandez, the town engineer, and anyone else. Janine Kovitz, of course, is here from Milton Hospital, and I believe Richard Fernandez is on the phone, but he can also participate. Um, Justin, would you like to start?
Yep, certainly. Thank you. So, as mentioned, Justin Moscow with VHB. We're the site civil engineers for the project for the parking expansion portion. Uh, as Marion mentioned, we received two letters that related to the site engineering and stormwater. First was from Horsley Witten Group, the peer reviewer, as mentioned. That's Steve Stanish is on with us now, as well as a review letter from the Milton DPW from Marina Fernandez, also on. So those came in, I think it was end of last week. We got um, responses back yesterday, which is part of that influx of information that you were mentioning, Chair. that we sent back for the stormwater was a response letter to the Horsley Witten peer review. We sent a response letter to the DPW review. We sent back updated site plans that address a number of those comments, as well as updated a stormwater report that also had several updates that needed to be made. In general, the vast majority of those comments were fairly minor in nature and just required adjustments to those plans and reports that the peer reviewer will be going through currently, just to make sure that and checking off that we've hit everything sufficiently. I did want to just point out a few of the more particular items of note just for the board's info. Um, there was there's an existing pipe towards the police station that was creating a point discharge that was causing some erosion down the slope towards the police station. Um, Marina walked that with the site engineer for that area, Chris Shea from Dupree, as well as a couple members of the project team as well. And they created some mitigation that has been added to the plans with some stone protection at the end of that existing pipe, as well as a level spreader to help spread stormwater out to eliminate that point discharge, and the spread outflow will prevent that erosion from continuing. So that was one of the main items, one of the main changes to the plans. There was a comment about there was two different O&M plans, one for each area, because there's two technically, not technically, but there's two separate project areas. There was a comment that was a bit confusing, so we've combined that into a single operation and maintenance plan that can be carried out by the hospital, and that operations maintenance plan has been signed by the hospital, so they've acknowledged their maintenance requirements. There was a request for a signed illicit discharge compliance statement, basically saying that we have separate stormwater and separate sanitary sewer systems, which was provided. There's a comment to see the stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is a construction phase permit with the EPA. But so that'll get put together later. But we fully agree that the town can have a copy of that and have a chance to comment on it before the site goes to construction. And then there was couple comments from DPW just about seeing flow tests for fire protection, which will get done, in sanitary sewer calcs showing the adequacy of the existing on-site system. That'll get done as well. Both of these can be provided with the applications that are made for those service connections with the DPW prior to construction. So again, Steve and Marina are both on. If you have any questions for them, but I think that's kind of the items I wanted to highlight, and certainly there were several more, but Steve's in the process of going through them and confirming that we've met them sufficiently.
Okay, thank you. If the board could hear from the peer reviewer at this point.
That's Steve Stanish. Steve.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Stanish. I'm a senior engineer with the Horsley Witten Group. I did the peer review for both of these projects. They were reviewed as a singular project. However, as Justin had mentioned, the majority of that review was a lot of clarification notes in nature, just to better define the design of the project and making sure that whether they were built separately or the same, the O&M plan and everything that would be the continued operation and maintenance of this project would be taken care of.
Just to confirm, O&M plan is the
Operations and maintenance
plan.
plan for the site for these proposed plans would be taken care of and underneath the same umbrella of the hospital's operation and maintenance guidelines for the entire site. A lot of, as Justin mentioned, a lot of these different design comments that we had as part of this review were clarifying in nature. They appear, for the most part, to have been addressed. I have gone through the resubmittal and I've submitted a few. At the end of the day today, I submitted a few preliminary comments to Marina that were outstanding. There will be a formal letter addressed to her in the town for this second submittal. I'm hoping to have that tomorrow to them for their review. And it's, for the most part, I think a lot of the comments have been addressed. And as Justin noted, there is one conditional comment that we recommended that will be done during construction time, which is that stormwater pollution prevention plan permit, or stormwater pollution prevention plan, part of the general construction permit, that would ideally be submitted to the town for their review and comment at a future date.
Any red flags for the board here? Doesn't sound like it.
Nothing appeared to be standing out that was a large red flag in nature, anything of the sort. There are one or two design questions we have as part of that second submittal for that the level spreader and the revision for that outfall area. But they're not major comments. I've sent them to Maria for her to weigh in on this evening, and they'll be part of the formal letter tomorrow. There are two outstanding zoning board / building commissioner comments that relate to the parking area, but I'd like to defer those to Marina or Mary to discuss. And maybe they're not ready for discussion just yet, but I will let them speak to those.
I know there's one that about the driveway, Steve.
Yep.
A second one?
The second one that was in the peer review letter that we had was regarding the parking spaces.
Just the adequacy of the count, right?
You mean overall?
Yeah.
Correct.
Oh, I remember now. Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that. The determination that the Board of Appeals has to make as to whether the amount of parking provided is adequate for the proposal. That's the second one.
That is correct.
Okay. And just to add, I mean, we've all reviewed your comments, your peer review, and there were a lot of comments on the operation and maintenance plan, which has been an issue in a number of developments that I've worked on. I haven't done that many, but it always comes up later on if it's not detailed enough. So your comments really were directed towards providing adequate detail, and they included such things as requiring that a vegetative maintenance plan be added to the O&M plan, and then little details like, labeling catch basins, having maintenance requirements for outlet control structures and so forth that are pretty technical, but they were all good details to add and will be included.
Thank you.
Do you want me to talk about the two zoning questions now? It's very brief. I'll just mention them. Would the board like me to do that?
Well, I think.
And not really,
Yeah. Well, I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to Marina at this point, and then when Marina's finished, I'd like to open it up to the board for questions.
Sure.
the three
Thank you.
folks. So, Marina, if you wouldn't mind chiming in here at this point.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Marina Fernandez. I'm the town engineer. I had the ability to review and kind of going back to what Attorney Manturin mentioned. I reviewed the scope of work before commencing this peer review process. Accepted the scope of work. I had a site meeting with the applicant's engineers. So we were able to review some of the concerns that the town had in terms of erosion. And then with the photographs and the information that we took at that site meeting, I submitted that to Steve, and Steve did a wonderful job reviewing not only every single detail related to the plan and the calculations, but also the O&M and everything that with the size of the engineering department that we have, we just don't have the manpower to go through such a fine detail. So we appreciate the opportunity to have the third party reviewer. I believe that most of the concerns, the general concerns, there's no red flags at this moment. The site erosion, the operations and management plan were discussed at this meeting we had today, alongside with the applicant and the third party reviewer, and as well as the designers. The other thing that was discussed is that with the permitting process prior to construction, we talked about some of the requirements would be for us to have a construction meeting to discuss site access and erosion control during the construction process, discussing a specific site entrance, which would be important once the applicant has a construction contractor on board, because they will be able to chime in, and we will be discussing more in terms of means and methods, if you know what I mean.
Is this the construction management plan?
Correct. You're right. So that'll be submitted along with the construction permits that every construction is required here in the town of Milton. They will be required to submit a water sewer utility connection, as well as stormwater management prior to construction. Usually those are submitted by the contractor, the drain layer, the licensed drain layer or construction contractor prior to construction. And then also very important to note is the applicant was submitting a proposed sewer extension to the new building that was going to be a 6-inch PVC. And according to engineering design and standards, the minimum we are suggesting is that they use an 8-inch, which should be more than sufficient for the new loads. But we are also going to be working with the applicant for them to submit load projections for the new sewer, make sure that everything is safe and in accordance, and there's no extensive loads.
Thank you. So we've heard from the applicants.
And one more thing I forgot to mention. So in terms of the zoning, the discussion that we had today, I'll let the applicant speak a little bit more about it, but it was a good catch by our reviewer in terms of, and I think that the building commissioner will be chiming in as to the width of the existing parking lot that is being resurfaced. It's an existing parking lot. The only improvements that are being made are to the resurfacing nature, and also the top width is being widened. But the existing driveway is 8 feet. The top entrance will be widened to 24 feet, And zoning regulations for new parking lot are that the driveway be no less than 24 feet. So the question is if that zoning regulation would apply to essentially an existing parking lot that is being currently already serviced, but the 8-foot wide driving apron.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Attorney McKettrick, I think you will want to address a couple of the zoning issues. We'll go back to you for a second, but at this point, I'd like to pause and I'd like to open it up to my fellow board members for questions to any of the three presenters here while we still have Marina on camera. Kathleen, any questions?
I was just sort of thinking ahead to sort of, if we decide, if we decide to proceed to issue a decision on this, how much of the whether we have to put in conditions requiring this construction management plan or the other things that had been suggested in this. I did read the peer review reports today and the changes that have been made to the plans and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud about how much of what, does Marina want to see conditions in the ultimate decision that reflect a required construction management plan or anything else that she thinks is important to have in the actual decision. Maybe that's a better question for Marion than for Marina.
Well, let's ask Marina first, and then we'll get Marion's response. Marina.
So my understanding, the discussion that I had with the peer reviewer is that I would receive a list of these conditions that were discussed today. Not only the list, but also the timeline, because every condition is suggested, and you will see, we'll talk about that when we talk about the transportation review as well. Be a condition and a timeline associated with that. So yes, we would like to see that on as the condition. I just think that time-wise for the stormwater, we're just so close, and there is nothing that seems like the applicant pushed back on. So I'll allow the board to make the decision. I'm comfortable with the list that will be coming up, and I will. Again, it's up to the board.
Thank you. Attorney McKettrick?
Just addressing that question first, absolutely, that's what we were talking about today. And one of the things we asked the peer reviewers to do was to provide that list of conditions and timeframes, particularly important for the traffic. You'll see when we get into the discussion about that. The point is, many of the comments have been answered, and changes have been made in the site plan.
Right.
So where it's been answered and the change has already been made, there's no need for a condition because you just reference the final site plan and the peer review, which is part of the record. But where something is required at a later time, such as the beginning of construction or post-construction, then it's very helpful to have that condition listed clearly in the decision. And the reason for that is that the building department finds it very helpful.
Yeah, because there were a couple of things I saw that were being submitted with a certificate of occupancy or before the certificate of occupancy could be issued. So that's why. And
rather than, so it needs to be in the decision, but it can be derived from the peer review comments and then the peer review list of potential conditions that have not yet been accomplished, but will be required at a later date. And that's what you should be looking for in the final sign off and the peer review, that should be included as part of the review. And we're expecting it. We talked about it.
Thank you.
Michael?
I'm okay with this discussion about the conditions, especially with Marion's clarification. And I don't have any questions at this time. I have some questions about the zoning issue and a couple of other things, but I think that Marion is going to address those, so I'll hold my questions for now.
All right, Marion, maybe at this point in time, unless you have anything else to say, maybe it's a good point to bring up those zoning issues that you mentioned.
Oh, okay. The first comment that the peer reviewer, Steve Stanish, made related to determining the adequacy, it's in our listed in our application, in the written application that I provided for this board, was a requirement that the board make a determination as to the adequacy of parking for the proposed use. That's in our zoning bylaw in the section on parking, I think section 8. And I specifically referenced that section of the zoning bylaw. It's probably better to not to discuss that now, but simply to say that as part of the parking and traffic management plan, that is addressed in a great deal of detail. It's also addressed in some detail in the peer review of the traffic and management plan. And some of the questions that come out of that have also been the subject of discussion, or were today with the peer reviewer, about potentially doing a 1 year later traffic study that looks at how parking is being used on the site, with an eye towards should the hospital be looking at making further adjustments depending on how the parking is working out. So it's all really part of what we'll be talking about for traffic management and parking, and should be addressed there, but it is a topic for this application. It is a section of our bylaw. It is one of the things that has to be determined by this board, and a decision on a vote has to be taken on that. But I would certainly say you would want to wait to hear some more discussion about the peer review of the traffic and parking. The second issue that was Steve Stanish asked whether, so this application is about adding an addition to the emergency area and adding a parking area next to the emergency department. As a sort of a side request, the hospital has submitted a request to add pervious pavement to it's a temporary employee, what's called a temporary employee parking lot for daytime use only, that's on the side of this site closer to Highland Street and has its own driveway and is not connected by a driveway to the rest of the site. The employees have to go up steps to get to the hospital. It's only for use, limited use. It had approximately 29 spaces as a dirt surfaced parking area. If it is paved with pervious pavement, the parking spaces will be lined and striped according to proper sizes. There will only be 26 spaces. That's an important point because the parking, so 2 points here that relate to the zoning requirement. The parking area is not new, is not being created for this proposal. The hospital is simply asking whether they have permission to put pervious pavement down, because the original conditions in that parking area were that it remain a hard packed dirt surface. That parking area was provided with a driveway many years ago that goes out to Highland Street, and it's 8 feet wide. That driveway width doesn't meet current parking requirements. Parking requirements which were adopted by the town after this parking area and this driveway were built. So the only change to the driveway being proposed here is that the plan shows the driveway being widened up next to the parking lot to a 24-foot width, just to allow easier access in and out of the parking area. So the question that Steve Stanish wanted me to take back to the building commissioner was, do you need any zoning relief to maintain this 8-foot driveway if you're resurfacing this existing parking area? I guess I'd say my opinion is that you do not, because it's a pre-existing non-conforming parking area, and it's not being created or changed because of this proposal. We're just asking as a separate part of this application to have permission to resurface it. And, if for some reason, and I don't see why it would be, widening the driveway at the top triggers a requirement to make the whole driveway 24 feet wide, then I think the hospital simply wouldn't do the widening. If you were to widen that driveway, you'd be going into vegetated areas that are, again, one side of it is close to the police station, where we've already been looking at drainage and erosion going down that steep hill towards the police station. It wouldn't really make much sense to further disturb anything in that area. The parking lot works well as is. It is a question that I was asked to take it back to the building commissioner. He was no longer in the building when we finished our meeting this afternoon. I've sent him an email. I've described the question, described the applicable section of the zoning bylaw. There's a section in the parking, the zoning for parking that talks about existing parking lots. And asked him to give us an answer. So I don't have it now. I expect I'll get an answer tomorrow. Hopefully he's going to be in the office. So that's maybe the board has comments or has something to say about that. That's the question that came up.
Ms. O'Donnell, any questions or comments?
No, I mean, I sort of agree with Marion that that's it's not part of the project. It's sort of like a side thing where as long as we got, tarmac going out here, we fix up the stairs and, fix up that parking lot, but it's not part of the application particularly. It's not part of the emergency room, and it's not additional parking for the site. So I'm thinking that it's grandfathered, but that's just my opinion.
That's my opinion as well. It seems like the use of that area is not going to be expanded, and I don't think that paving it triggers any additional zoning relief.
All right, I agree with my fellow board members, so I think that this is close to a non-issue, if you will. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that further feedback.
Okay. Also, from a practical point of view, recalling the way it's laid out, it doesn't seem to make much sense to do the widening as it might end up having to be if it wasn't grandfathered. So, just from a change point of view. So, okay. All right, so is that the end of, if you will, site civil?
Janine, do you have any comments you wanted to make or on behalf of the applicant for the hospital after today's meeting?
I really don't. I think you summed it up really well. I didn't hear anything in any of the conversations we've had today that isn't something we can at least work with. So I think for the most part, we are all on the same page at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. So on this part of it, Attorney McKettrick, what's outstanding? What are we waiting for here? And if we're waiting for anything, what's the timeline for getting it?
We're waiting for a final letter, which comes from the peer reviewer after approval by the town, which would be the town engineer, that all comments, questions, and concerns have been responded to. So you know how the peer review is set up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you see a response. I've given you a copy of that. You have the peer with the responses. Then after that, the responses go back to the peer reviewer, and the question is there another response that comes back? There are only a couple of, there were a few topics where we still seem to need to work out the details, but we were in general agreement. That will come back from the peer reviewer. It's going to go to the town engineer, and we're asking for it. We actually have the letter from the traffic peer reviewer. She provided her letter back. But it was like just before this meeting. So I can tell you that we already have that letter, which is going to Marina Fernandez, who will be reviewing it immediately. On the stormwater engineering, the peer review response letter to the hospital's responses will be, they're trying to get it done tomorrow. That will go to Marina Fernandez. And the next step is for Marina to say, back, if there's a comment that has to come back to the hospital, to the applicant, it comes back. We are already aware of what those comments are. That's why the hospital has been fully involved in these discussions. And they've gone back to Richard Fernandez, the president. And we seem to, as I think Janine has correctly said, we are all on the same page. the hospital's going to be able to do what it's being asked to do. In terms of timeline, if we get the response letter back, we already have the response letter back on traffic. If we get it back on stormwater tomorrow, then it will be just a question of how many days for Marina Fernandez to review it and for us to address any remaining hanging bits and pieces that haven't been responded to. You'll have to decide how you want to proceed when you get to the end of this meeting. We have to go through the whole traffic and parking presentation. If the board wants to close the hearing or mostly close, I guess I'm just trying to think. They may have to, I don't know whether you can close it if you still have information that's going to be coming in, but you won't really need to. You'd certainly want to meet very quickly if you weren't going to make a decision tonight, because we're going to have all this information within a few days. We had to wait a long time to get the reports during the summer. They are very detailed. A lot of work has gone into them, but everyone has worked hard to get the responses back because we feel some time pressure here. The Kearney Hospital situation has certainly increased the pressure on Milton Hospital. And so the town, the select board, you can see if you read the article in Milton Times today, they had a discussion about this. Everybody wants to get this going and moving, but we need to deal with the details appropriately. The peer reviews have been extremely helpful in that regard. This is technical information. I don't really know that much about it. And especially to have the peer review and the response and then to actually be able to meet together today, it made a huge difference, at least for me. At this point, I feel I understand any questions that still need to be answered, and I know what the conditions that will have to be fulfilled after a decision are going to be. They've already been written down in the traffic response that we've received, and I expect to get them tomorrow from the engineering peer reviewer.
All right. Well, I think that we'll have a discussion as a board concerning this once we finish the traffic review piece. I'm pleased that there appears to be so much agreement amongst the parties at the moment, but there are details that need to be worked out. This is a significant project with however, I think everyone understands the equities involved here as well. So, all right. Michael, Kathleen, any comments that you want to add at this point, or are we ready to move on to traffic?
No comments.
Okay, let's move on to traffic. Marion, what do we have here?
Okay. Well, we have Rebecca Brown from GPI, who is the peer reviewer. We have Sean Manning, who would like to be allowed to share screens. I think you've already done that for him. So that he's going to start off with a presentation about the traffic management and parking study and the peer review. His presentation incorporates changes that have been requested in the peer review. And then we'll have further discussion about the details in the peer review response.
Okay, so Sean will be first.
Yes.
All right, Sean, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Sean Manning, I'm a principal with VHB. Before I share my screen, I've got some interesting information to share with the board and the public, maybe just to go over procedurally one more time what we went through. We developed a transportation study to reflect everything that the applicant wants to do that was submitted to the town some time ago, kind of the beginning of the summer. The town did retain a third-party peer reviewer. That's GPI. They're on the phone tonight. They had the opportunity to review our submitted materials, and they provided a memorandum to us asking a number of questions, additional input, clarification, that sort of thing. Also had a number of requests and asks that would ultimately become conditions of the approval, if you so choose to do that. We did respond to all those questions and clarifications. We did that a couple of weeks ago. We had a meeting today with the town engineer and the peer reviewer to go over our responses. We've come to agreement on what we believe our conditions should be, and those are reflected in a memorandum from the peer reviewer to the town that was submitted officially today. So the deck that I'm going to walk you through is reflective of all of those things, and certainly we can have additional commentary after I go through that. So I am going to share my screen, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And can folks see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
How about
Now
now?
we can.
Okay, terrific. And I will try to go quickly. So there are a number of things we will walk through. I will touch upon each of these individual elements as we get to them. But to give you an overview, this is a site plan of the campus. What's in gray is what is proposed. What's white is existing. Primarily, it's the emergency department expansion, approximately 6,000 square feet of emergency department addition. What's important about this addition as it relates to a transportation standpoint, we have quantified additional trip making based upon the additional square footage added to the hospital. In reality, the philosophically the point of expanding the ED is to modernize it and right size it to what's happening today. So, technically, it really won't result in additional trips, putting aside what's going on with Kearney and all of that. But we were very conservative in terms of just looking at it from a square footage standpoint and saying, okay, additional square feet is going to mean additional trip making. If you look up on the top, where this is where the parking expansion is going to be. It is going to add 78 parking spaces in that parking field. The intention of that parking is to try and push more employees, staff, and physicians to that lot so that we have a better pool of spaces near the hospital for patients, easy, convenient spaces. We're also eliminating the remote parking lot down the street and having those employees park on campus, which they tend to do anyway. Number two is the gravel lot that's been talked about in sort of the grandfathering end of the driveway. So that is the existing driveway that actually will result in the capacity going down by a few spaces. So it's roughly 29 today. If it gets resurfaced and striped, we believe we can get 26 spaces in that lot. So ultimately, 77 additional parking spaces coming on site in addition to the emergency department expansion. This is just speaking to that off-site parking down the street. Really, the operation of the shuttle bus, getting staff on campus. They really prefer to be on campus in a suburban situation. We see this in a number of other hospitals where we do work with other proponents. This will be, again, more convenient for staff. It'll be better for staff retention. And I think there's been some feedback relative to the shuttle bus going back and forth from folks in the neighborhood. So this is a summary of trip making, and you can see that the trip making connected to the ED expansion is quite small. It's really a handful of trips, whether you're talking the morning peak commuter hour, the afternoon peak commuter hour, and we did look at an afternoon peak hour as well, per request of the town to do that. So very, very low, and frankly, this is all, again, philosophical because we're really just trying to right size the ED and have it work the way that it wants to work for the patient loads that are coming through currently. So I took out a bunch of slides to make this more brief, but we looked at a number of intersections surrounding the site to understand what's going on from a traffic situation today and how does this project, if put in place, impact the operation at those intersections. And what we found is that the changes are really infinitesimally small at all locations, with the exception of the Reedsdale driveway, the hospital driveway to Reedsdale. And that's for a number of reasons. Most notably, we're really trying to push traffic away from Highland and move it over to Reedsdale. So that driveway approach to Reedsdale is going to experience some additional traffic in the afternoon. But that aside, town intersections are really not going to change in terms of their operational characteristics during the peaks. The other thing that we really wanted to look at was cut-through movement, and I know that this board has heard from the community, and I suspect we will tonight as well, as it relates to cut-through traffic on Spafford Road. And this is something we noticed, and I know Richard Fernandez in separate abutter meetings was asked to give this a closer look to understand what is going on relative to this traffic that's on Spafford. And what I can tell you, for the most part, it's a regional issue. You know, you've got Waze, you've got onboard navigation, but I suspect this has been going on for a very, very long time. Folks trying to get from point A to point B in the fastest means possible, avoiding the Southeast Expressway, and they make their way up Randolph Avenue. We've noted a number of locations where there are turn restrictions that keep you from getting more directly to Highland, and it's really just pushing folks to Reedsdale and then trying to find a way to cut back to Highland. And unfortunately, that happens to be Spafford Road. So one of the things we did was try to quantify to what extent is this going on and to what extent is the hospital contributing to this. And I've got a couple of graphs that speak to that. So essentially what we did is we filmed with technology that can identify actual cars, vehicles, what's coming up Spafford and turning on Highland, and then of those cars, what's turning into the hospital. And what we determined very quickly is that certainly there's a significant amount of traffic that's coming through Spafford. The vast majority of it really has nothing to do with the hospital at all. It's just continuing north on Highland and going wherever it wants to go. That being said, and this is sort of this is from 7 to 6 p.m. This is going kind of inbound. 20% is related to the hospital, and the community has submitted pictures of certain vendors that certainly are hospital vendors, and we have to do better. We have to keep those vehicles off of this street, and I've got a number of slides that are speaking to things that we are and will do to support that. But this primarily is a regional issue. This is simply looking in the opposite direction. So this is southbound traffic on Highland that's heading to Spafford. Same outcome, significant amount of cut-through traffic. The vast majority of it really has nothing to do with the hospital at all. Roughly 3/4 is regional. This is simply summarizing all the things that I just said. So here's one of the things that we will do in connection with the project. I know the community has identified ambulances as, you know, one of the things that they see when they look out their front door. And in the existing condition, the ambulance bays are on the south side of the hospital core. And what I suspect happens is when they finish delivering their patient and they're heading back to wherever they're going with their lights off, it is just very easy to roll out in this direction and head to Highland Avenue and go wherever they're going to go. In the expanded condition, the ambulance bays are actually going to be on the north side of the building. So they're going to be pointing in the opposite direction. And we are making the driveway in from Highland to the north side of the hospital one way. So it is going to cut off the ambulance's ability to get back to Highland. But not only is it going to do that, it's going to cut off all of that parking on the north side of the campus from exiting in this direction to go to Highland. So we really believe that the amount of traffic that even wants to go to Highland is going to be reduced significantly by this physical geometric alteration within the campus itself. The other thing we're going to do is communication. So we are going to add signs at Highland, providing really a safety net to let those vendors know that, you know, this is not the way to come in as a truck. It's also going to be communicated directly through materials management at the hospital to the individual vendors that they're to come in and leave via Reedsdale. Of course, you get different drivers on some days and new vendors, and I don't know that we'll be 100% successful, but we're going to try really hard to push that and really limit that activity as best we can to have any hospital contribution, to this neighborhood issue be severely reduced or eliminated. This is just a summary of all those things that I talked about that we're going to do relative to cut through traffic. And again, it's related to design improvements, reorientation of ambulance bays, reorienting access and circulation aisles in the hospital to direct folks towards Reedsdale, and then policies and communications with vendors to have those vendors also go to Reedsdale as well. And then back to the peer review, there are a number of conditions that we went through today. We are essentially accepting all of those from GPI, but I will walk through these quickly with you. At Highland Street and the hospital driveway, we've got some sight distance issues for those that drive by there. There is quite a bit of brush and what I will call lower tree limbs that may inhibit people's ability to see as they come out onto Highland Avenue. Also, a white picket fence that goes pretty much to the edge of the property, and we think we can bring that back a little bit. We're committed to doing that relatively soon. We think that's low-hanging fruit, so to speak, easy thing to do, good for public safety. We're suggesting we would do that prior to building permit for beginning construction for the project. At Reedsdale, Canton, and Center, and then at Randolph and Reedsdale, prior to getting a C of O, we are going to go out and do some detailed counts, understand in a little better detail what are the traffic limitations of what's going on at those locations. We're going to see how we can best kind of optimize signal timing and phasing, maybe to ease some of those congestion issues that are experienced by folks in the town. And we're also going to conduct an RSA. It's a road safety audit. And for those that don't know what that is, it involves bringing together the town engineer, the police department, the fire department, identified residents, where we get together on site, talk about what we believe are kind of operational and safety concerns, and see if we can come up with ways to improve what's going on out there. So again, that's something else that we would do with these locations prior to C of O of the project. Post occupancy, we want to look at Reedsdale Road and the hospital driveway because, again, we believe while we're not going to add a lot of traffic with this project, we are going to shift traffic away from Highland and over to Reedsdale, and that is going to result in potentially some increased queuing on the hospital driveway towards Reedsdale. And we want to understand what things we might do if that level of activity is unacceptable. And we're suggesting we would do that some increment of time after post-building occupancy. You tend to wait 6 months or maybe a year for the building to be complete, let things settle down, and then go out there and sort of understand that dynamic. So we're committed to doing that. At Highland, Canton, and Thatcher, similar to the other two intersections, though, a little more simplified. We're not suggesting an RSA or a road safety audit here, but we do think we can go out and look at the signal and see if we can, polish it up a little bit and have it work a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently. The other thing that the hospital is committing to do is joining New Ride. New Ride is it's run by Mass DOT. It used to be called Mass Ride, so it's the Mass DOT's TMA, Transportation Management Association. And if there are ways that we can introduce our staff to this program to reduce single occupant driving, we will do that as best we can. This is obviously not a transit hub as it might be in downtown Boston, and it is difficult with medical uses to get folks to use alternative transportation because they tend to have different shifts. The shifts are kind of designed to be outside of peak commuting hours because these are essential staff that have to be on site on time. But we are committed to doing this and doing the best we can to limit single occupant driving as best we can. So then the latter streets, which is all the stuff I went through before, we did do these pre-counts. We're committed to doing some post-counts to understand what is going on and hopefully provide some feedback to the community as it relates to what the hospital's contribution to this is. And I fully expect that it'll go way down. So we're excited to do that. We're also going to look at parking down the road and provide some feedback as it relates to what's going on with the parking and is the parking that we're adding in connection with this application sufficient? We believe it is, but we've agreed to do this post-occupancy parking study as it's been asked by the town and the peer reviewer. So that's all I have for now. I obviously happy to answer folks' questions, take their comments, and thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. I think what I'd like to do is follow the same process that I followed with the site civil stuff. So at this point, I'd like to hear from the peer reviewer, Rebecca Brown. Rebecca, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Rebecca Brown. I'm with Greenman Peterson, and we did prepare the traffic peer review. And I'm not going to go through all the comments that we had. I think Sean did a great job already of, kind of walking through the general findings of the traffic study. We have, as he mentioned, had some back and forth. So we did submit our initial peer review comment letter back in early August, which essentially the majority of those comments were asking for some additional clarification of how they had assigned trips through the network, making sense of some of the parking calculations that they came up with, as well as some comments related to how the capacity analyses were conducted. In the responses that we received on Tuesday of this week, the majority of those comments have all been addressed. So they've provided all of the additional analysis that we had requested, provided clarification on the items that we weren't sure about. And then they had also provided some commitments to some mitigation measures. And generally, we found that those were all acceptable to us. We did have a few outstanding comments that, as was mentioned, we submitted our what should be final letter to the town earlier today after meeting with representatives of the town and the applicant's team. And I think Sean probably already described the majority of them, but there were two locations within the study area that were high crash locations that we did recommend that the applicant prepare a road safety audit or perform a road safety audit at those two locations prior to issuance of a certificate of occupancy. The findings of those of the road safety audits would be something that the town would be able to use to secure funding through the Highway Safety Improvement Program for safety enhancements at that location. So that's the primary reason for asking for the applicant to do that, as they do have some impact on the traffic, but obviously not creating the existing safety issues that are there today. There were also a few locations where there were a high number of crashes that were either rear end or angle collisions at signalized intersections where there could be some adjustment to the pedestrian and vehicular signal clearance intervals that may make sense. And at two of those locations, there were some impacts from the traffic reassignment, I will call it, from the hospital. And those include the intersection of Reedsdale Road and Canton Avenue, and then the Canton Avenue, Thatcher Street, and Highland Street intersections that Sean mentioned, where we had recommended that they put together an optimal signal timing plan there to see how they can adjust the timings to kind of optimize the operations there, but also to ensure that the clearance intervals are long enough for cars to safely be able to stop before the next approach turns green. Excuse me. And then we had also noted that post-occupancy, we had recommended a number of different studies be conducted by the applicant. Sean did walk through all of those pretty well, but essentially what we had recommended was that post-occupancy, they look at the parking that's on site and evaluate what the parking demand is from approximately 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening. So it's kind of getting that fluctuation of employee shift changes and outpatients coming in, visitors coming in, you get kind of that mix throughout the day. And that they evaluate the parking post occupancy based on user groups so that they're looking at handicap parking spaces, employee designated spaces, visitor designated spaces, patient designated spaces, and so on separately throughout the entire day. Because although their overall study was showing that they have enough parking as a whole on the site, it is showing that the parking will be about 97% occupied during the peak time periods, which means that some user groups might actually have all of their parking that is occupied. So, for example, there may be some handicap spaces that are available, but a visitor coming in may not be able to use those spaces. So we wanted them to evaluate those separately as part of the post-occupancy study as a way of making adjustments to designation of parking if that's required, and potentially changing sort of times of day when parking spaces may be needed for varying user groups. The other one that we asked them to do as a post-occupancy study was for the Reedsdale intersection with the site driveway to collect some additional traffic counts during the same peak periods that were studied as part of the original traffic study, to be able to assess what the traffic operations are following the implementation of the improvements and the expansion of the ER. And we had recommended that that be done at least 6 months, but within a year following occupancy. We want to give a little bit of time for traffic to normalize. So that's why we typically recommend at least 6 months, but within that 1 year timeline. And based on that, if the study does indicate that the queues are extending back into that first internal intersection on the site campus, which is roughly 350 feet along the driveway, that they look to do some improvements there, which could include signalization of the driveway. It could include installation of additional turning lanes, or if it's only for a short period of time during the day, potentially a traffic control officer at the driveway during those time periods when that queuing is occurring. Similarly, if there is excessive queuing that's occurring out on Reedsdale Road, then we would want them to look to do some improvements there. And that study, that post-occupancy study for the parking and for the Reedsdale Road intersection, would both be submitted to the town for their review. The town could have the option to have a peer review consultant review that if desired. But they would also submit their findings to the town. And we had recommended that if the study shows that improvements be done, that they be done within a reasonable timeline. We've suggested 18 months, but obviously that is still under review by town staff to see if that's an adequate amount of time for improvements to be implemented. But we had suggested approximately 18 months. And then the last item that we had obviously was for the cut through traffic study. So we did recommend that they do sort of a pre-study. So prior to the start of construction, they go out and establish a baseline condition for cut through traffic through Spafford Road, Buckingham Road, Martin Road, and Clifton Road, to establish how much cut through is actually happening on those streets today. And then similar to the other post-occupancy studies, a period of 6 months to a year after occupancy, they would go back out and repeat the study to see whether or not the hospital has had any impact on the cut through traffic on those streets. And that information, again, would be intended for use by the town to identify any potential traffic calming measures or cut-through mitigating measures that they would like to implement on those streets to be able to reduce the cut-through traffic that is occurring. And that's sort of the extent of kind of where we're at with our comments now and sort of the conditions that we were recommending be imposed as conditions of approval. There were a couple little items on the site plan that we had asked to be cleaned up just for some signs to be added. They did respond back that they would do that. So we would want to make sure that prior to building permit that those get incorporated. One of those also includes the sightline plan that would show the area to be cleared at the driveway that would allow them to achieve AASHTO recommended sight lines at the site driveway. But that's essentially what our comments were at this time.
All right, thank you. I'll ask you the same question that I asked the previous peer reviewer. Any red flags here?
No red flags. I would say our biggest concern was obviously for the parking. I think there's enough parking, but it's a matter of how the parking gets managed on the site, and that's where the post-occupancy parking study comes into play, so that they can address any temporary shortfalls in parking that they may have for certain user groups.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments? That's it? Oh, okay. Ms. O'Donnell, Mr. Brown, any questions or comments for the traffic and parking people?
Well, I just thought it was interesting about the, sort of looking at the other intersections that are impacted by this traffic and recognizing there's really not a whole lot the hospital can do about those kinds of traffic improvements. I mean, it's kind of like we make them do a study, but then what's going to happen with it after that?
Yeah, are you talking about the road safety audit?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so they would do the study to identify measures
we
that
probably
can be
had it studied
implemented.
18 times and nothing's ever happened.
So they would do the study to identify mitigating measures there. And as part of the road safety audit, the road safety audit doesn't look for like a one big solution that can fix the whole thing. What it does is it identifies varying solutions, and you actually identify some low cost items that can be done with short money, short time frame to be able to improve an intersection. And so conducting the road safety audit will provide the town with some information on low cost measures that they can go out that very often make a big impact to the safety of the intersection. But then they will also identify some more long-term higher cost items that the town would then be able to use the findings to apply for funding for those improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Mr. Brown?
I don't have any questions. I kind of share Kathleen's comments and concerns, but no questions. Thank you.
All right. Marion, is there anything you'd like to add, or is there, I see Marina Fernandez, the town engineer, is still listed as being a panelist. Is there anyone else from your point of view that would like to talk to this particular issue?
Marina, do you want to say more? I have one comment, but. Oh, yeah, I think you're muted.
Marina, you're muted.
Thank you. I think both presenters did a good job summarizing the discussions and thoughts we had today. I am in the process, like it was said before, I just received Rebecca's letter. So I'll be reviewing that and maybe asking a couple more questions if needed before it's finalized and sent to the applicant. I do want to say that it was important for the town to request the applicant to submit the pre and post traffic count for the latter streets, because we acknowledge that maybe one project is not what will be the tipping point for a traffic modifications or of users in those on those streets, but maybe a cumulative factors, cumulative projects in the area, and having that data and working it through the different uses is how we may achieve some solutions or in future designs.
Thank you. Marion,
So just comment again on the most primarily post-construction and some pre-construction, but the studies that are being requested here of the hospital. I did my first reaction was to ask questions similar to what Kathleen O'Donnell just asked. You know, we're not going to make these changes. I mean, we're not going to put in a new traffic. These are decisions the town makes, and then the town seeks funding. But my understanding at this point is that what the applicant's being asked to do is to contribute something to the town in the form of doing initial studies of a number of things that were described here in more detail. So crash history, signal timing, at various intersections that surround the hospital. The hospital is one of the contributors to traffic, along with many others. That information then will be given back to the town, and the town can use it just like it uses all other traffic studies that it does or that it gets in the context of other developments, to decide what types of projects, traffic change projects, it wants to undertake, and to support applications for outside funding if they're available. So looking at it that way, we're being asked to provide some mitigation. This is a project, and one of the things we have to show is that we're not going to substantially impact neighboring properties in the neighborhood. And these traffic issues certainly are constantly topics for the neighborhood, particularly the study of the latter streets and the traffic on the latter streets. The hospital may be only contributing a relatively small portion. They're being asked to make a contribution by doing the study. There are other projects that are coming underway that are also going to be doing studies, and the town may undertake its own studies. I don't know what mitigation the town will decide it can do, but the hospital can contribute by providing some data. I think these requests are being reviewed by the president of the hospital, by the applicant, by the president of the hospital. They all have a cost. We're under a lot of pressure. The hospital's being asked to do a lot right now. They're going to be getting additional patients. They're going to be getting an additional admissions in their emergency room because of the closure of Kearney Hospital. So I just think there needs to be a balance. I don't think these requests are necessarily unreasonable. I guess I'd ask the board to look at each one of them and to decide that altogether they make sense. If there are too many requests in here, then maybe eliminate one of them or something like that. The only thing I have a certain concern with, although I understand why it's being requested in general, is this idea that we do a traffic study or would do a signalization count or something like that. Then it goes to the town. Then there's some further follow-up that the hospital could be asked to pay for. I think that might be going too far. I mean, I don't see it as related to this project. That's just my comment. We want to move this process along. We want to get an approval. The hospital's trying to be very cooperative. So maybe I shouldn't even be saying that. But I do think that when you look at how the follow-up, the studies are described and structured, it bothers me that the follow-up goes too far into the future. It means the building department's going to have to be looking at not one step, but 3 steps, and whether they've been properly complied with. So just keep that in mind. We want to have enforcement by the building department be straightforward. So all these conditions that have to be met in the future will be listed. the timing for them will be clear. It should be a one-time requirement. That's my one request. I mean, not one study necessarily, but each study should have one set accomplishment point.
I appreciate the applicant's point of view here. I think that this board in general, by this board, I mean the Milton Zoning Board of Appeals has done, I think, a good job of attempting to balance the burdens imposed upon applicants with the burdens that applicant projects impose on neighborhoods, and it's our job to balance those equities. And I think that this board attempts to be fair in that regard and to make sure that the balancing, as I mentioned, is in the front of our minds as we move forward. The other thing to take into consideration is that these projects are forever. So we want to make sure that we do it right. So I appreciate your comments. What I think I'd like to do at this point in time is just toss it back to Mr. Brown and to Ms. O'Donnell, see if they have any questions or comments at this point. Marion, if you're finished with the main part of your presentation, once Mr. Brown and Kathleen have asked any questions or made any comments, I'd like to move to some comments from members of the public who've been very patient. I do note that there is one person who has very patiently raised their hand, so we'll get to that person shortly. But have you completed the bulk of your presentation?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Michael, Kathleen, any additional comments or questions before I open it up to members of the public?
Just a very brief comment in terms of traffic. The traffic situation in that neighborhood, in particularly the ladder streets, is a bad one. I don't know the extent to which the current situation is contributed to by the hospital. It doesn't seem to me that the application is going to have a significant impact in terms of increasing the existing traffic situation. And so I'm just trying to keep that straight in my mind that, I don't see much evidence that, the proposed work on the site is going to contribute that much to the traffic situation. However bad it might be today, I don't see it as being much of a factor. Just a comment.
Thank you. Kathleen, anything you'd like to add?
No, I mean, I sat in on the planning board hearings for the memory care when I was on the planning board, and I know that the traffic on those ladder streets is a real problem, and I've also driven on them myself. But the problem is, as I said, as Michael said, looking at the reports that have been done on the studies, it seems to be mostly people with cut-throughs, not people going to the hospital. And I appreciate the hospital's efforts to redirect traffic internally. And then I think that would be something of a condition or something to talk about when we move forward on this, if we do, to sort of think about some way of enforcing the fact that they have to notify the vendors and the ambulances of the fact that they shouldn't be using those streets. So at least we're not contributing any more than we already are now. But that's, it'd be interesting to hear what the neighbors have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Michael. I think at the beginning of this hearing, you noted that the applicant can control what the applicant can control. And I would note that the applicant has proposed changing some of the geometry of the site. I think that that's a significant development. There are studies that can be done, but quite frankly, there are things that are outside the applicant or indeed outside the town's control. And that is an issue. All right, so at this point in time, what I'd like to do is to open it up to attendees, members of the public who have been very patiently, as we all have, been listening to these presentations. And I'm going to take folks in order as I've seen it on my screen who have raised their hands. I'm going to ask Bill to allow folks to comment. The order of folks that I'm going to have comment would be Nadine, Bard, and Manette. And that is simply because you folks seem to be the folks who have raised your hands first. Now, as always, please, we would ask as a courtesy that when you do make your comment, that you put your camera on so that we can have a conversation, though it's a request, not a requirement. I'd also ask that you make your comments to the board, to the chair, and we will attempt to answer your questions. So we'll begin with Nadine Hanna. Nadine, welcome to the Board of Appeals. If you wouldn't mind just stating your names and your address, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, everyone. It's Nadine Hanna, 11 Stafford Road, and a sleepy 3-year-old right here. Thank you very much for having us tonight. And thank you for continuing the robust conversation about the proposed project at the hospital. Just in response and to kind of continue awareness.
Nadine, just real quick, what's your address?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I said 11 Stafford Road.
Thank you. I missed it. Yeah. I missed it. I was watching the assistant presenter too closely.
She's a distraction, but a cute one, so it's good. And because she is in attendance, I will try to keep it brief. As mentioned, as Kathleen mentioned, in the neighborhood, we are also undergoing conversations and have, the potential project for memory care facility being put into the top of the street. As everyone knows, that is a property that the hospital is currently in possession of and would be selling to memory care, Avita, et cetera. And in those conversations and in these conversations for this proposal, the neighbors have been invited to speak by Mr. Fernandez to speak with him and on issues that we are facing in our neighborhood that we largely as a collective on Stafford Road do believe to be attributed towards the hospital, specifically traffic, water, a number of other concerns. So we are facing a greater change in our neighborhood, and traffic is a large one, and not just everyday, sedan, vehicular, pedestrian, whatever, regular people traffic coming in and out. Although if you do live here and spend more than 24 hours observing, for myself, I do walk the loop from Spafford to Reedsdale, past, town towards the police station and up Highland. And I try to get a good 5 or 6 laps in because each one is a mile. And I will see many vehicles exiting specifically from the Highland entrance or exit, and then using Stafford to bring themselves back down to Reedsdale. So, that being said, I do believe that there is also, has been stated, that our larger concern is the commercial traffic, the trucks, the ambulances. And one thing that I want to mention that I read in the article that you mentioned earlier tonight, is when in the article that was in the Milton Times today, Mr. Fernandez did respond that, or was quoted that the emergency room director is going to be working closely with Coastal Ambulance, which provides EMS services to Milton and other companies, on how to carry out load balancing, which allows ambulances to be diverted to a less busy hospital to avoid long waits. Now, one thing in the invitation for conversation that we have raised our concern towards Mr. Fernandez, people from the town, about the ambulance traffic, of which you've seen many pictures from us. And we have been told that those were not conversations that they were really capable of having, that those companies weren't they just couldn't address it. But now we're seeing, quoted here that they can have those conversations. Mr. Fernandez said that he hadn't had them himself, but perhaps we could suggest that in helping to, kind of mitigate some of the traffic with the ambulance that we're experiencing, that perhaps there is someone in the building who does have that contact. And I just wonder if it should and could be appropriate to happen now. And I will pass on my question as to why it hasn't happened thus far. But I do think it's important to note that there is a statement relative to ambulance traffic by, the ID Milton president, that is something that they can speak to. And I certainly would like to see it finally happen for more than one reason. Now, also, previously, as far as traffic is concerned, one more minute and then we're going to go up, I promise. The statement was made that the changes to the parking had to do specifically with the current load of patients that the hospital is experiencing. And now we all know with the unfortunate closing of Kearney Hospital that we are expecting an influx of patients. So we're expecting an influx of traffic. Our current problem is going to get worse. We have an existing problem. There's a hospital that is certainly closing, that is going to be redirected. There will be patients redirected here. And now on top of it, in perhaps a year or 2 years' time, we may see a memory care facility at the top of the street, which will further burden our street, Stafford Road, and probably the greater part of the neighborhood. I don't see Buckingham, Martin, and Clifton really experiencing as much of the issues that we are, but it's going to become a larger problem for the area. That's all I can do, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for balancing things like a pro. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Take care.
All right. Bard, you're next. So Bard, if you wouldn't mind just restating your name so I don't massacre it again for the nth time, and your address, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure. Hello, everyone. Bard Hyrizi, 11 Spafford Road. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to everyone who's presented here tonight. Some important information presented, and I share some of the concerns that as that Nadine has said, and I do agree. I think with Mr. Sean Manning there, where he described the problem that we're facing as a regional one, and I think one of the frustrations has been we've pointed out in detail how restrictions on other streets on do not enters and turn restrictions have just encouraged traffic up our street. And as I jot down the numbers here, I think I saw in his presentation 334 vehicles from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. up Spafford, and 297 down Spafford on a weekday, for about 631 total in March of 2024. And my other screen here, I've got traffic counts from Milton's DPW from March 2019, so 5 years ago, and that number over a 24-hour period in the same month on a weekday was 272. So the increase is almost 300% or 250%. And so it's cumulative, and I think Ms. Marina Fernandez said it. There's a point where it starts to reach a level of traffic where you've turned a 20-foot wide narrow, what was a country road originally, which is certainly non-conforming because it doesn't have sidewalks and visibility is very poor. You're turning into a thoroughfare, and thoroughfares have far more safety measures than our narrow street does. So I think even though the data shows about 20% of the traffic is due to the hospital, the majority of traffic is not. It's all cumulative, and I think the point's been made. You do reach a certain point where the street becomes very dangerous, and I think we've lived that over the last 5 years, and maybe others like Manette, who's lived here 10, 15 years, would tell you it's been a dramatic change. So certainly more than what the town at large has faced, and again, that's not all the hospital's fault, and I would applaud Mr. Rich Fernandez for some of the suggestions in his outreach. We've had some good conversation. So I think my personal belief is that we have to prioritize safety and look for solutions that help keep us safe, understanding that all the traffic's not going to go away. It's just increasing, and one of the things we've been trying to push for, after repeatedly being told no for various traffic mitigation measures, is this idea of speed humps, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Sean, but there was a kind of a correspondence this week, right, where I think he came out pretty strongly suggesting that is a very good idea. So his opinion carries a lot more weight than mine does, or ours, those of us on the street. So being able to use these studies and the opinions of experts like Sean Manning to go to the town and say, to go to the select board with a petition, for example, and say, that the hospital's traffic expert engineer is recommending, 3 speed humps on Spafford. It's very low cost, and would lower speeds to 20 miles per hour and keep the streets safe, and really wouldn't inconvenience anyone. And the city of Boston is putting in 500. We've just put them in on Governor's Road, which, by the way, has no trucks allowed. In our street for some reason does. So things like that, those kind of practical solutions, if we're able to work together, and I think Rich had said to me that he's willing to voice support for safety measures like that. I mean, I think those things would really help us and wouldn't be a cost, huge cost. So that's kind of where I want to try to push. And I understand the hospital hasn't, it's not all on them, but if we can use these reports and this data, and I do think there is some value to a post-project report, to be able to say, hey, it tracks what we expected, and we haven't done anything unintended. But I understand we want to balance not putting too much of a burden on the hospital. And also, as I said, and I think, Mr. Chair, you referenced the physical changes of rerouting exiting ambulances so that they're facing, they cannot exit out of Highland. I think that will definitely help. The truck signage internal to the site will definitely help. So we appreciate all the efforts, and I personally understand and support the need for the expansion so that the hospital can continue to meet the needs of the community. But yeah, I'm happy to have I know you guys probably want to wrap up, but this is a very important topic for us. So happy to have any discussion anybody wants to have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bart. And we as a board understand how important this issue is to the neighbors, and we appreciate your input. The next person I'd like to hear from who has raised their hand is Minette. So Minette, if you wouldn't mind joining us, stating your name and your address, please.
Good evening. My name is Minette Donovan. I live at 16 Spafford Road in Milton.
Welcome back to the Board of Appeals, Minette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for your time. I know it's getting late, so I'm going to try and move right along this evening. You were all very generous last meeting to review slideshow of the traffic in the neighborhood, and Nadine also has submitted a great number of photos. I understand they're all sort of officially part of the record for this hearing, and I thank you for all of great work that's going into this look at traffic here. However, I do want to note something important, which is this project is in large part for an emergency department expansion. Now, 20% of our traffic on Spafford, approximately 20 to 25%, is attributed to the hospital, it's my understanding. We have a new issue, which I believe is not accounted for in the studies, and that is this emergency department proposed for expansion originally was to address current volumes, I believe is what was stated. We now have an article today that's saying we're expecting, and this is just what we're expecting, a 20% increase in emergency room visits. So we see about 38,000 per year, it's my understanding, and the source of that is from the newspaper article. So I believe the statistics were from the hospital. If we're looking at a 20% reduction, it's about 110 ER visits per day of an increase. So, you know, conservatively, that's 20 patients a day. So what coming in by ambulance, perhaps just based on our own experience, one sibling, one child might be called, a second sibling might come later in the day. That's going to generate couple trips. So we're pretty quickly looking at a lot of additional traffic here. So I think that to the extent that we're looking at later follow-up, it's very much, especially if we're trying to do this expediently because of the closure of Kearney. That's why it would be of a great value. And so the town engineer brought up an excellent point, which is looking at cumulative projects. We all know what they are in this town. And they're going to directly impact our neighborhood. And we really are in a residential area here. So we have an expectation of not all of this traffic volume increase. And so it's fair for the hospital to come to the table, and we thank them for doing so. So I'd say these follow-up studies and these initial studies, I thank you for them. They're important, but I would respectfully request that they take this into account. Because right now, if you go to Kearney, there is a big, in multiple languages, sign on the window that says, this is closed, closest one is Milton Hospital, and gives the address. So we're assuming 20% reduction may be based on when, you know, so many hospitals have closed. We saw the closure of Quincy. So we're really, you know, that's just an expectation of an increase there. And so I would say that maybe the follow-up, something that tends to be successful, and it's just common sense, in addition to the hospital's a really important neighbor. And I think us getting involved with the town and getting traffic mitigation measures in place with their support is just a win-win for everybody. And I thank you for those sentiments. But I would also request that when this is done and when these studies are done on the back end, maybe that there's some type of a committee or something that's made up of a Spafford Road neighbor, someone from the hospital, someone from the town, that we just, you know, continue following up over time so that we are, you know, it doesn't just kind of drop off. And the last thing I would just say, and I know I live here and you've seen the signs from the pictures from many, many years old to historic homes. It's a very small street. And if anyone who has the, you know, important job of voting on this and considering this, I'd ask that you come and walk Spafford, walk Martin, walk Buckingham, and walk Clifton. And what you're going to see is Spafford is very different. Spafford is the narrowest of all four streets. Spafford it's 20 feet. I took the tape measure and measured in front of my house, side to side. That includes any shoulder, and we have no sidewalks. So I looked on the Pioneer Institute of Public Policy and Research collected information on road width all throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's on the Mass Housing website. And, you know, generally we're looking at standards at loss not less than 50 feet for new developments. But the minimum, you know, maybe 32 feet for some. But the narrowest road is going to be 20 feet. And we're looking here at a two-way street. So width generally for a width is about 10 feet. So two cars going either way, there's your 20 feet right there. Where do we put the pedestrian? If it's a school bus or a garbage truck, where do we put that ambulance trying to shoot around it, or a fire truck? So it's Spafford Road, I think, is very unique, and it needs to be looked at uniquely in this study. And I thank you all for your time and for listening. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. I would just add that members of the board have walked. Shall we? I will borrow the phrase earlier. We've walked the ladder streets, so I think we're very familiar with the area. So, and I
Thank you.
thank you for that. And I would also hasten to add that it is a beautiful street with a lot of beautiful homes, as there are a number of very nice homes in that area as well. All right, so those were all the hands that I saw raised. Mrs. McKettrick, I believe I saw Mr. Fernandez's hand raised at one point in time, but I want to give you the opportunity if you'd like to add anything at this point before the board kind of has a little bit of a discussion in terms of next steps.
I don't have a lot to add at this point. I did see that hand up. I don't see anything right now, but we'll hear from Richard Fernandez. Oh, here it is. So if you don't mind, if Richard Fernandez could speak next. Oops.
Happy to, Mr. Fernandez. Welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the time. I just wanted to comment. I know I've talked to I just want to comment on some of the comments of the neighbors. I mean, I think we all know how tight, particularly Spafford Street is, and I think the comments by the neighbors and some of the before and after reports are the right thing to do if we can help the town kind of make some decisions or modifications to both help Highland Street, but also particularly Spafford. We are, as you can see, fully supportive of that. I do want to clarify for Nadine about the comments about ambulances versus vendors, just so everybody is 100% clear. First, when we did this application, our intent was to handle the current volume. That obviously changed 35 days ago. So this will help us greatly with any current volume we get. But the ambulances, we don't have a contract with them like I do with a vendor for linen. I think that's the distinction. So we have talked to the ambulances and we will continue, particularly as our volume grows. But it's different than I don't have a contract that I can put it in like my linen company. That's the only point I wanted to make, just so people are clear with ambulances on that side of the road. And I would just I don't know if Sean Manning's still on, but the 20% or roughly 20 more patients spread over 24 hours, I still think, I don't know the numbers, is probably a very small percentage of overall traffic in the traffic study. But I just don't, in my car, have the data, but I don't know if Sean just wanted to comment, but that's what we're looking at. We're looking at approximately 20 to 30 more patients a day spread over a 24-hour period. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Appreciate everybody's time and input on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. Sean, if you heard the question, I'd be happy to give you an opportunity if you want to.
I will try to answer the question as best I can, Mr. Chair. Thank you. What I can tell you is when we got involved with trying to quantify the project, obviously this Carney issue was not even on our radar screen whatsoever. It's something that's been dropped on us and we're dealing with it. It's consequential. It's going to happen, whether this project happens or not. None of us can control that. But as it relates to that increase of patients, which is real, and the neighbors have articulated that accurately, as best as I can tell, we want to manage that traffic as best we can. This traffic does not belong on neighborhood streets. And, I think what I've tried to articulate and what Richard Fernandez has tried to articulate, we've quantified the problem. We've tried to quantify the hospital's percentage of that problem, and we're going to try to the best of our ability to do something about it. It doesn't belong there. What strategies might we put in play for the other traffic that's there that, frankly, I believe also does not belong there at all? Is there a way to move it? I think there are strategies, but those are town strategies. They're not hospital strategies. And if there's a medium for this conversation to continue, terrific. If we can't get the traffic off the street, the next best thing is to slow it down, right? And there are a number of things that you might consider. And I know, some of the neighbors talked about, getting pedestrians off a narrow street. And I think that's a terrific idea. You know, having a sidewalk is great. The problem is they're expensive to implement, and they could potentially have significant impacts on people's front yards, right? So that's not an easy thing to get either the town or a lot of neighbors to agree to. So I don't, sounds like a good idea, but it may be a good idea. It may not be a good idea. I don't know. But I guess that's the roundabout point I'm trying to get to, is that from the applicant standpoint, we are going to control what we can control. Absolutely. And we're going to measure it to understand if we are effective or not. I believe we will be very effective, but we have been asked by the peer reviewer to quantify that both before and after, and we indeed are going to do that. As it relates to the rest of the traffic, and I empathize with the neighbors because it's real. We've measured it, and again, I'll say it again: the traffic doesn't belong there. It's a complicated process to figure out how to get it to move off of that street. But I understand the concerns. I think it's been raised very articulately, and it's an issue. It is.
Okay. Thank
Pardon
you,
me,
Sean. I appreciate your comments. Nadine, did you want to make a comment?
I did, and I just had a question also, if that's all right with you. And it's 11 Spafford Road again, if you need it. So now that she's asleep and it's the stress level is down, I do appreciate all of the efforts that particular Rich has put in, and all the boards in town, everyone who's contributed. And you should never underestimate that we have been heard a lot, and we have learned throughout many processes, most of which for other projects we started as complete amateurs. If there is an opportunity to ask a question or to raise a concern, you should do it whenever you have the chance, because there's consistently throughout, the memory care facility, even the zoning, this is not an issue for this meeting. This is a zoning issue. This is not an issue for the planning board or for Concom or for whatever, or for this meeting in particular, because we're only addressing X, Y, Z. And the next thing you know, there's no option to have that conversation. Yeah. And you're here at a meeting for a parking lot asking for people to pay attention to your dire traffic concerns. And
Indeed, let me interrupt you for
sure.
for just a moment.
Sure.
So, as the Board of Appeals, we will take all input from folks, and all of my fellow board members. We want to make sure that people feel that they are heard and that they've had a fair opportunity to state their case. At the end of the day, you may agree or disagree with the ultimate decision, but none of us sitting on this board wants to be in a position that someone's going to say, you didn't give me the opportunity to have my say. We will do that. However, we are not all power. We're not the Wizard of Oz. We can only do what we can do. And it's certainly, we'll note your comments and whatnot. And I know that you're going to address them, but I just want to set expectations here, is that, again, the board can only control what the board can do. And to a certain extent, we can let other entities in the town know of the concerns and whatnot, but we're not the traffic commission. We're not the public works department. Sometimes I wish I was, but I'm not. So, and neither are my fellow board members. But, at the very least, what we can do is put concerns and comments on record so that they are out there. So, I just want to, we won't stop listening. It's just we may not be able to do what is ultimately asked. So, but
fully.
I just wanted to lay that out.
No, I appreciate that. And I think you actually made that pretty clear in the first meeting. So I do appreciate that. And and I understand the need to continue to repeat that. And that being said, there is a question that I did wonder on, which would relate particularly to the scenario in which it's, many hospitals have limitations on their entrances. And for example, the main road entrance would be the only one available to perhaps, outpatient or emergency room for, excuse me, not emergency room, people, visitors, et cetera, perhaps the back entrance is not suitable for that type of traffic. And also, or it should only be ER traffic entering and exiting through Highland. And if they're saying they won't be able to left exit, but that perhaps we also get a no truck on Spafford, they won't turn up Spafford to get up and in, and then won't be able to come back down and around. Those are the kind of things that, perhaps in addition to redirecting traffic on site at the ER station, perhaps they could limit how people use that back entrance when they're inbound as well. Um, you know, just while we have the chance to actually ask the question.
You're doing exactly what I would do.
Thank you.
Asking the question. So thank you for that, and thank you for putting that on record.
Thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of the meeting and evening as well.
Mr. Chair, if you could offer me a minute, I'm happy to respond to that thought, because we did study that actually.
All right, Sean, I'll give you the minute.
Sure. So it's a good question, and I think on the surface you would say good idea. Limited driveway or even no driveway on Highland. That should be better for Spafford. It actually isn't, because you still have people that will come down Highland to get to the hospital, and if they don't have the opportunity to use that driveway, what are they now going to do? They're going to turn on Spafford to get to Reedsdale and go in. And we actually, because we studied this, and we actually believe that while on the surface it seems like a good idea, it actually makes the problem worse.
All right, thank you for putting that on the record. I believe that is actually in the materials that were provided to the board. I believe that statement was, if I recall correctly. So thank you. All right. Marion, one last time, any additional questions or comments based upon the subsequent discussion?
I don't have any additional questions. And I think my comments were basically going to be that the hospital will do follow-up studies, because it's the only way really to determine the effectiveness of the measures that are proposed as part of this application. And the more everybody talks about it, including Sean Manning and our other consultants, the more reasonable that requirement does appear to be. I think it really will provide the town with information that's valuable. And I believe that if those studies are done, they will contribute to formulating some measures by the town to provide traffic slowing or mitigation or directional changes on the latter streets, particularly on Spafford Road. So while every change like this, every new construction proposed, new parking lot, and of course the Kearney situation, which is just now on our shoulders, it's difficult for everybody to adjust to that. And we all recognize there can be impacts. But because we had to do this application and we have to talk about how we're going to provide mitigation for what we're proposing, these studies will be a result, and I think in the end they are going to be helpful to the town as well as to the neighbors. So I hope you can see that as a positive outgrowth of this whole application process. That's it for me.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point in time, what I'd like to do is for purposes of an initial board discussion from a timing perspective. It would seem to me that we're coming to a close in the evidentiary portion of this hearing. And I'd like to open it up to my fellow board members relative to the direction that what your opinion is regarding the direction we should go in terms of next steps. There are several outstanding items, I think, that need to be delivered in terms of some peer review comments and whatnot. But Kathleen, do you have an opinion on next steps?
Well, I think, I mean, my inclination is to sort of close the public hearing with the understanding that there are some items that are coming in this next week or in the next couple of days, and sort of reserving a spot for those. But that we would start to consider our decision and consider to going through the materials and seeing what we would include for conditions to assist the town in its review of the application, I mean, of the building applications and all that sort of stuff. But I'd like to see us move forward in a quick fashion to sort of wrap this up and get the project going.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I agree 100%. This has been moving as quickly as it can be since our first hearing. I think we should continue it. The hospital's obviously under stress. And I think we should do everything that we can to keep this moving quickly. So I don't know what that means in terms of if we close the public hearing, do we have to advertise our next meeting? And does that pose some, time problems? Marion's shaking her head. I guess not.
I mean, it depends on, excuse me. I defer to the chair. I mean, try to answer. I can't. I'm sorry.
Well, don't take this the wrong way, but you're far more experienced in these matters than I am, having been a former chair of this, former member of this board itself. So your advice here is certainly welcome.
I also suspect that Marion has probably thought through what she would like to request from us and probably has the most efficient way for us to go about this. But anyway, suffice to say, I would be in favor of having a hearing on the next and maybe final hearing on this as soon as would be feasible with the information, expecting the information to come in.
Yeah, following, we can continue. You can discuss a little more whether you have to close the evidentiary part of the hearing or whether you have to keep it open because you're waiting for the sign off on the peer reviews with all the conditions listed. Those are going to be useful to you in discussing a decision. But let's say in any case, you do need to set a next date. I hope it can be soon, but I know your schedules are busy. The next date does not have to be a continuation of, if you close the evidentiary portion of the hearing, the next meeting can be still in public. It's still a public hearing, but there you're just discussing the decision and, going through the evidence, talking about the conditions, unless you finish somehow doing that tonight. So my concern is the time. I believe we can get the peer review final. We're just about at the end of the traffic peer review process, just as we reviewed by the town. We're going to get the final product for town comments tomorrow from the other. So within a week, that will be done. That should be completed. And then, I don't want to have, if your schedules are tight, I think we need to work around when you're available to meet one more time. And I don't know how much longer you want to go tonight.
All right, from my point of view, I'm uncomfortable closing the evidentiary portion of the hearing when we have new evidentiary materials coming in. It would seem to me that the next time the board meets, we can close the evidentiary portion of the hearing at that meeting once we have received what is essentially new evidence. So I think just from a logical point of view, that would be my suggestion. Frankly, I don't know if there's anything that's coming that's going to change anything tremendously, but I want to make sure that we cross all the T's, dot all the I's. The big thing is that I think the next meeting we close the evidentiary portion of the hearing, we begin deliberations, discussing the deliberations, discussing whatever additional conditions, whatnot. And I'm sure that the applicant will have some idea regarding what conditions they would like to propose and could perhaps share those conditions with the board as it begins to consider its next steps as well. It begins, it's a question of timing. I think the peer review stuff looks like probably going to be available early next week at the latest, would you say?
That's what we're expecting.
Okay. I certainly am available for a hearing if it can be noticed appropriately for Wednesday or Thursday of next week.
I can't do Wednesday, but I can do Thursday.
I could do Thursday as well.
So Thursday works for me. So my suggestion would be that we continue this hearing till, and I'm not making a motion here at the moment. My suggestion for discussion purposes is that we continue this hearing to Thursday, September 12th at 7 p.m. I want to make sure that that doesn't run afoul of any public meeting or posting requirements.
Well, if you announce at this is still the same hearing. You
That
need
is
to
correct. It's a
announce to the public.
continuation of a
Yes.
hearing. So
it's not a new hearing.
Right.
All right. So I guess officially now, I would like to move to continue this hearing. Can I have a motion to continue this?
I would make a
Hearing.
motion to continue the hearing for the limited purposes of receiving the peer review reports. And to set the next meeting for September 12th at 7 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. So the next meeting will be on Thursday, the 12th at 7 p.m. For the limited purpose of receiving the peer review and related materials. At that point in time, I would expect that the evidentiary portion of the hearing will close and the board will begin its deliberations. For the members of the public who are watching this, under the open meeting law, the board deliberates and votes in public. Depending on how things go, we could very well have a vote at the following deliberations on Thursday, the 12th. So I just want folks to be aware of that. Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Okay.
None from me.
All right, Mrs. McKettrick, any questions or comments from the applicant?
None other than what we can do to help you. Sounds like you want me to work, you would like me to try to come up with a list of conditions that I've determined from reviewing all this material before the meeting, and would that be helpful?
It would be helpful to the board, and the board, of course, reserves the right to add, subtract, modify, decline any of those suggested conditions.
Yeah, sure.
So before I leave, before I close this hearing, we've had a number of folks who have been faithfully attending all these. I want to just make sure that none of the members of the public have any questions or comments. If you do, if you'd raise your hand, I'm going to give folks a moment. It is 9 o'clock, so the hour is late. All right, hearing none, seeing none. Thank you all for your time and attention. And this hearing is continued until Thursday, September 12th at 7 p.m.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good night.